Thank you for watching this video from KingswaySoft. Today, I will be introducing the SSIS Integration Toolkit for Salesforce. The Salesforce Toolkit is a high-performance data integration solution that works for Salesforce.com, utilizing Microsoft SQL Server Integration Services capabilities. In today's demo, we will show you our software running in a SQL Server 2012 environment. If you are using a different SQL Server version, the interface might be slightly different. To get started, let's create a simple SSIS project. This tutorial will assume that you already have the SSIS bits installed. Otherwise, you will not see the SSIS project type here. In the Business Intelligence template, select the Integration Services project and give your project a name. Press OK to create the solution. SSIS is a platform that can be used to implement data migration and integration using its drag-and-drop capabilities. To begin the SSIS implementation using our toolkit, we will create a connection to the Salesforce.com server. To do so, right-click in the Connection Manager area and select New Connection. Then we will choose Salesforce from the list and select Add. First, we need to fill out our login credentials. The security token would be something you request from Salesforce through its web UI. Instance type allows you to specify what Salesforce instance to connect to, with Production, Sandbox, and Other as the three options available. Production and Sandbox will automatically populate the service URL option below. This field is only available when the instance type option has been selected as Other, in which you can provide an alternate URL that will be used to post transactions to your Salesforce instance. The timeout option lets you specify the maximum number of seconds that the Connection Manager will wait while trying to connect to Salesforce. We also have proxy server connection settings, which you can enter if you're behind a proxy server. In the Advanced Settings tab, there are a few options to choose from. When Allow Save on Duplicates is enabled, the service calls to Salesforce will indicate that duplicates are allowed. Allowed field truncation is similar in feature, indicating that field truncation is allowed. You can also specify the assignment rule to be fired when lead or case is created using the Salesforce Destination component. You can also choose to use the default assignment rule if required. The Retry and Intermittent Errors option is designed to help recover from possible intermittent outages or disruption of service so that the integration does not have to be stopped because of such temporary issues. Request Limits allows you to specify the number of API requests to send to Salesforce in a 24-hour time period. Depending on how you set up error handling within the Destination component, it may behave differently when the limit is reached. It could fail the entire component or redirect the input rows to its error output. Before we hit OK, we should test the connection to make sure our information is correct and we can connect successfully. After creating the Salesforce Connection Manager, you would start to create data flow tasks to facilitate data integration. Within your data flow task, we offer 3 data flow components that would help you implement integration solutions for Salesforce. Salesforce Source component can be used to read or retrieve data from your Salesforce instance. Salesforce Destination component can be used to write data to your Salesforce instance. Salesforce Wave Destination can be used to write data to the Salesforce Wave Analytics platform. In order to use those 3 components, you would want to make sure they are available in the SSIS toolbox. If you are using SQL Server Integration Services 2012 or later, those 3 components should automatically show up. If this is not the case, you can click the Toolbox button. Note that if you're using SSIS 2008 R2 or earlier, you need to manually add these components to the SSIS Data Flow toolbox. To use the Salesforce Source components, we can simply drag this component to the design surface of the data flow task. Double-click to configure the component. The first thing is to select the Salesforce Connection Manager. Notice that the default batch size is 1,000. The maximum allowed value is 2,000. There is an option to include all deleted or archived records. If enabled, these deleted or archived records will be included in the output of the source component. Using Bulk API allows you to read data from your Salesforce organization through Salesforce Bulk API. Note that when this option is enabled, the Included, Deleted, Archived option above will have no effect, as Salesforce Bulk API does not support reading those records. The Source Type option allows you to specify how we read data from Salesforce. There are two options available. You can choose to read from Salesforce Object, in which case you are reading every record from the specified Salesforce object. Alternatively, you can choose to read data from Salesforce using the Object Query option, which gives you more control over what you read from Salesforce. For instance, you can add query conditions to Object Query to filter data. You can use Salesforce functions in the query. You can read from parent objects if required, and so on. Let's start with Object, and we'll select Contact as our source object. The Output Time Zone option specifies how Salesforce datetime values are retrieved. There are three options available: Time Zone of the Connection Manager, Adjust the UTC, and Adjust the Local System Time Zone. Let's navigate to the Columns page to configure what fields we are reading from Salesforce. Here you will notice that by default, all the Salesforce fields are selected. This may not be the best practice. You should only select the fields that you need to use in the downstream pipeline components. If the source object has been previously selected, by default when selecting Object Query, the object and the selected field names from the Columns page will be included in this query. Let's go back to the General page and select Object Query as our source type. It should be noted that our toolkit has the most sophisticated support for complex Salesforce object query, including support for child-to-parent relationships. Notice the Refresh Salesforce Metadata button. This button is especially useful for cases where we have created new fields in a particular object in our Salesforce application, and we would like these changes to be reflected inside the component. Clicking this button will retrieve the latest metadata. We'll click OK to finish the configuration of the source component. As soon as we finish configuring this source component, we can add more SSIS data flow components to the same task to facilitate the integration. For this demonstration, we're going to add a dummy data reader destination component for the purpose of showing you how the data flows from the source to destination components. We will now execute this task. Next, we will create a new data flow task to demonstrate the destination component. In our example today, we will update the address information stored for a particular user in Salesforce. To demonstrate this capability, we will use the data spawner as the source component to generate one row of record as the input. We will also use a premium derived column to add some hard-coded values. The data spawner and premium derived column components are part of our SSIS Productivity Pack offering, which contains a collection of premium SSIS components to enable greater developer productivity. Next, we will drag a Salesforce Destination component to the design surface and connect to the upstream pipeline components. We'll select the Salesforce Connection Manager and then choose the action type we'd like to use for the destination component. We currently support 6 action types: create, update, delete, upsert, merge, and hard delete. The create, update, and delete actions are fairly straightforward. The upsert action first checks for the existence of the Salesforce record, based on an upsert external field or the incoming record's ID. If a match is found, the matching record will be updated using the most recent incoming values. Otherwise, a new record will be created at Salesforce side. The merge action takes one record as the master record and a list of records to be merged for each incoming row. The destination component sends merge requests to Salesforce. The end result is the master record will be retained. It's important to note that the merge action is only possible with the following Salesforce object: account, contact, lead, and person account. When this action is chosen, you must provide the following 2 input columns in order to merge the records: master record ID and records to merge IDs. Master record ID is the ID of the record that other records will be merged into. Records to merge IDs is the ID of other records to be merged into the master record. If the input contains more than one record, ID values should be separated by a semicolon. The hard delete action will permanently delete records from Salesforce when bulk API is enabled. For this demonstration, we will use the upstart action along with the destination object as contact. Since we are using upstart, we'll need to specify which field is going to be used for the upstart external ID. The external ID field is required for the upstart action. It can be one of the upstart external ID fields that you've created in Salesforce, or the primary key field of Salesforce object, which is ID. As you can see, we also support Salesforce Bulk API. This option utilizes Salesforce Bulk API to write to your Salesforce organization. Data will be processed asynchronously. When this option is enabled, the following bulk API-related options become available for configuration. When the write batch files with UTF-8 encoding option is enabled, this can help improve working with non-ANSI characters in case there are any. We generally recommend turning on this option for best encoding compatibility. The bulk data format option has 4 types: CSV, zip CSV, XML, and zip XML. We generally recommend the zip CSV option as the format will create the smallest batch files for the same amount of data to be processed. The concurrency mode has 2 options available: parallel and serial. When parallel is selected, the batch file will be processed in a paralleled fashion as Salesforce side, providing some better processing performance, but also meaning that the sequence of the submitted batches is not respected when they are processed by Salesforce. When the serial option is selected, the batch file will be processed in a serial fashion at the Salesforce side. The bulk job ID variable option allows you to specify an SSIS variable that you can write the bulk job's ID in order to track the status of the job in Salesforce later. There are some additional optional settings available. Remove invalid characters will remove any invalid characters from the input, which can avoid an XML exception during the SOAP request. Ignore null value fields allow you to ignore any field to have a null value. It will not be posted to the Salesforce server. This is helpful in preventing overwriting non-empty values with an empty value. The Send Datetime Values in UTC format option will indicate that the incoming datetime values from your source are already in UTC format. When this option is not selected, the input values will be treated as the current user's local time. Enabling the Send Empty Strings as Null Values option allows you to specify whether to send empty strings as null when writing to Salesforce. When this is disabled, empty strings will not be converted to null value. Therefore, it will not be posted to Salesforce. This can be helpful in the case where you want to retain original values in Salesforce when the incoming value is empty. Next, we'll go to the columns page to map the necessary fields for the writing. As you can see, some of the input column fields have automatically been mapped to the destination Salesforce field based on a name match. To demonstrate the functionality of the Text Lookup feature, we will map account name to account ID for the account record. If you press the button, the Text Lookup settings will appear. Select the Use Text Lookup option. The target object is established for us. In our case, it's the account object. We will select Name as the target text field to do the lookup on. We will use the Text Lookup feature to use the account name to find the account record. You can also opt out for certain target objects if applicable. This is useful in the case where there's more than one target object in your Text Lookup, but you only want to look up on certain objects. You can also set an optional default value. When specified, this default value will be used to perform the lookup should the input value lookup fail. The Text Lookup feature comes with a number of configurable options which are designed for specific integration scenarios. There is an option to ignore case, which is essentially doing a case-insensitive lookup, to report errors when there are duplicates, and to skip the record if the lookup fails. The cache strategy option is important to keep in mind for performance reasons. The Text Lookup feature involves populating an internal cache. In the case that you choose full cache, we will populate a full cache when the lookup is first hit. This is recommended when the number of records in the lookup object is relatively small, and/or the primary object has a large number of records. The partial cache mode is recommended in the case where you're processing a very small number of records, but your lookup object contains a large number of records. The last page is the error handling page, where there are 3 error handling mechanisms to choose from. The default option is fail on error, where the entire data flow will fail as soon as an error occurs. There is also the redirect rows to error output, where the error output will contain the failed records with extra columns: error code, error column, and error message. These 3 error columns can usually help you identify why the error happened. The ignore error option is generally not recommended, as the component will remain silent for any errors that have occurred. There is also the enable columns for default output section, which you can use to enable or disable the additional columns in the destination component's default output. Salesforce ID gives you the newly created Salesforce Records ID, and isNew tells you if a record is a newly created one or if it is an existing record that has been updated. There is also an option to enable the skipped rows output that will contain any records that have been skipped during the process due to failed lookup. Let's click OK to finish configuring this component. We can now execute this data flow task. As mentioned before, the Salesforce Wave Destination component can be used to write data to the Salesforce.com Wave Analytics platform. To demonstrate this capability, we will use the data spawner as the source component to generate some sample data. We will also use a premium-derived column to add a hard-coded value for our Salesforce GUID. As mentioned before, the data spawner and premium-derived column components are part of our SSIS Productivity Pack offering, which is a collection of premium SSIS components to enable greater developer productivity. Now let's drag the Salesforce Wave Destination component and connect to the upstream data flow components. On the general page, we must first select the Salesforce Connection Manager. The operation option allows you to indicate which operation to use when you are loading data into the dataset. There are 4 operations available: append, delete, overwrite, and upsert. The append action will append all incoming rows to the dataset. If the dataset does not exist, it will be created. The delete action will delete the rows from the dataset. When this option is selected, there must be one field that is selected as a unique identifier, which has the isUniqueID property set to true in the columns page, and the field must be mapped so that it has an input value. The overwrite action will create a data set with the given data and replace the data if it exists. The upsert action will insert or update rows in a dataset. If the dataset does not exist, the dataset will be created. When using this action, similar to the delete action, there must be one field selected as a unique identifier, which has the isUniqueID property set to true in the columns page, and the field must be mapped so that it has an input value. The app name option specifies the name of the app that contains the dataset. This option is also known as EdgeMart container in Salesforce Wave terminology. If the name is omitted when you're creating a dataset, the name of the user's private app is used. If the name is omitted for an existing dataset, the system resolves the app name. If the name is specified for an existing dataset, the name is required to match the name of the current app that contains the dataset. The dataset name option specifies the alias of a dataset, also known as EdgeMart alias, which must be unique across an organization. The Dataset Display Name option specifies the display name for the dataset, also known as edge-marked label. The Fully Qualified Name option specifies the fully qualified name of the dataset. Next, you can specify the email address to send notifications to once the load is completed. This option can only contain one email address. If no address is provided, the component will default to the current user's email address as specified in the Connection Manager. The Notification Mode option specifies when to send notifications about the data upload to Salesforce Wave Analytics. There are 4 options available: always, never, failures, and warnings. Let's navigate to the columns page where we can define our Wave Analytics data scheme and also map input columns to the Wave Analytics fields. We can use the toolbox on the right portion of the window to add, change, and remove destination fields. You can also define the destination field's metadata here. Note that when using the upsert or delete operations, we must specify a field as a unique ID. I will quickly set my ID field as true where isUniqueID field is available. There are also 2 additional function buttons that can be used to import and export columns. Let's click OK to finish configuring our Wave Analytics destination component. We can now execute this data flow task. This concludes the demonstration of our SSIS Integration Toolkit for Salesforce. Thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to take a look at our other videos available for viewing on our website or YouTube channel. For any further assistance, please feel free to contact us.